In this module, we're going to start taking a look at all the things that can make us anxious. We're going to look at the causes of our anxiety. We're also going to look at why women are twice as likely to be diagnosed with anxiety as men. Most importantly of all, we are going to focus on what makes you anxious. So let me start by asking a simple but important question. What makes you anxious? I imagine you're saying, Wendy, what doesn't make me anxious? You wouldn't believe what I deal with in my day-to-day life. School, work, parents, kids, my partner, my health, my money. In fact, getting out of bed every day makes me anxious. I do twice the work in half the time than my male counterparts. I am running on empty. Of course, we women are twice as likely to be diagnosed with anxiety. And I hear you. No question about it. We all have good reasons to be anxious, especially these days. But let's get specific about your anxiety. And let's do that by exploring some of the possible external sources of your anxiety. Some of these sources you may already be aware of. Some of them may come as a real surprise. Anyway, as I read down this list, I hope you'll listen for the ones that resonate with you. So, here are 6 categories of possible external causes of anxiety. Physical, caffeine, genetics, hormones, trauma, and the media. All right, let's take them one by one, and let's start with the physical causes of anxiety. There are a number of medical issues that can make us anxious. Heart disease, diabetes, thyroid problems, which I know about personally, IBS or irritable bowel syndrome, just to name a few. And there are a number of other medical conditions that can make you anxious. There are also some medications that can cause anxiety. In addition to asthma medications, ADHD medications, blood pressure drugs, thyroid medicines, steroids, and medications containing amphetamines, birth control pills can make you feel jumpy. Really? Who knew? Even some over-the-counter drugs can contain caffeine, and that can make you anxious. So, if you have any of those medical issues or other medical issues, if you're taking medication, or even if you aren't, even if you don't have any kind of a medical condition, I think one of the most important things you can do to address your anxiety is to make and keep an appointment with your healthcare provider. Ask all your questions. Get those questions answered. The more you know about your health and your well-being, the better off you're going to be. So, to deal with these physical causes, step 1, check in with your PCP. Next on the list is caffeine. Now, you may be someone who's able to have your 4 cups of coffee a day and have no side effects whatsoever. If so, party on. But for some of us, caffeine can be an issue. Believe it or not, caffeine is a drug, and it can make some of us really anxious. Now, if you feel jittery, 10 in the morning as you're checking in to work, I'm going to ask you to think about the caffeine you've had earlier in the morning. If you have trouble falling asleep, if you have unexplained headaches or stomach issues, consider the idea that caffeine may be to blame. Just a reminder, caffeine does not just show up in coffee and tea. It comes in some unexpected places. For instance, energy drinks, sodas, and I'm so sorry to say chocolate. So if you suspect caffeine might be making you anxious, I'm going to ask you to take a look at what you're consuming throughout the day. I'm also going to recommend that if you decide to reduce your caffeine, you do it slowly. Withdrawing from caffeine can cause some really unpleasant side effects. So take it slow. Okay. Third thing that can cause anxiety could be genetics. Is your anxiety inherited? Maybe, maybe not. We really don't know for sure. Research into the role genetics and environment play in our anxiety is still in its infancy. Nurture versus nature, not sure. But in the last few years, researchers have located a specific gene that's correlated with social anxiety. They've also located a gene that may be a factor in developing panic disorder. And I find this personally interesting because research has also found there's a tendency for generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD, to run in families. I know it certainly runs in mine. So the research is indicating that genetics may play a role in those three anxiety disorders: social anxiety, panic disorder, and generalized anxiety disorder. And I believe that, we're going to find that there are other anxiety disorders that have a genetic component to them. So, is your anxiety genetic? Take a minute and think about your family history of anxiety. Does your sister have panic attacks? Maybe your mom was diagnosed with social anxiety. If you have a family history of anxiety, your anxiety may be in part inherited. In other words, it may be genetic. All right, let's move to number 4, which is hormones. Now, this probably won't be a surprise to you. We've found research is showing now that one of the biggest reasons women are more anxious than men is because of the changes in our reproductive hormones over the course of our lifetimes. I'm talking about the hormonal changes during PMS, pregnancy, post-pregnancy, perimenopause, and menopause. These changes in our hormones can make us anxious. Now, maybe you're smiling because you know what I'm talking about. Maybe you've experienced some of those symptoms of PMS, those monthly changes in hormones that can make you depressed, angry, nervous, sick to your stomach, shaky, out of sorts, crazy, and generally miserable. Well, those same hormones can make you wildly anxious. In fact, they can be the cause of panic attacks. And get this, if you're already suffering from anxiety, your symptoms can get worse at this time of the month. Sound familiar? Now, maybe the very first time you ever felt anxious was during those hormonal shifts that occurred during pregnancy, or you were surprised to experience a sudden increase in anxiety or panic after the birth of your baby. We hear a lot about postpartum depression. Well, there's something called postpartum anxiety that we don't talk much about. It's a thing. Maybe you are experiencing or have experienced the physical and hormonal changes of perimenopause and or menopause. And one day you noticed you're suddenly anxious, or that your long-term anxiety has gotten worse. All of this is about our hormones. And if any of these symptoms sound familiar, please know you are not alone. You are not crazy. Shifts in our hormones can and do make many, many women anxious. All right, 5. It's a tough one. I want to talk about the anxiety caused by trauma. Let me begin by saying violence or abuse of any kind. Now, please hear this. Violence causes suffering. Whether the violence happens to you or you just witness it, violence can cause you to suffer. The trauma of violence not only causes pain and fear in the moment, but if left untreated, trauma can leave deep emotional scars and wounds and fears that haunt you for a lifetime. I would say this over and over and over again to every person on this planet. This is so important, and we don't talk enough about it. Violence causes trauma, and trauma causes pain. And you don't have to experience that violence yourself to be traumatized. Just witnessing violence can cause trauma. And here's another statistic I find so distressing. As Joel Young writes in Psychology Today, and I quote, half of all women experience some form of trauma during their lives. 1 in 4 of them have faced an attempted or completed sexual assault, and 1 in 3 report being abused by a domestic partner. Let me say it again. 1 in 2 of us have been exposed to trauma. It is no wonder we are so anxious about our personal safety, about our lives. It's no wonder we work so hard to make sure our surroundings are safe, that we are safe, that our sisters and daughters and mothers are safe. And it's no wonder we are 3 times more likely to suffer PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, 3 times more likely than men to be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. And not only can the trauma of violence lead to PTSD, it can also lead to other anxiety disorders, panic disorders, and some phobias. As Michael J. Mufson, MD, a Harvard psychiatrist, writes, quote, trauma can actually rewire our brain in a way that makes it more susceptible to anxiety, end quote. Trauma makes us anxious. So if you've experienced or experience any kind of lingering trauma, that may well be a part of what is making you so anxious. The 6th cause of anxiety is the media. And I want to talk about, actually, there are 2 parts to this, and I want to discuss both of them today. The first part is how women are portrayed in the media. And I have that in capital letters in my brain. The second half is the 24-hour news cycle. Let's start by looking at how the media portrays women and how that affects what we think and how we feel about ourselves, how we look, our appearance, and our bodies. Years ago, girls learned to be women by watching how the real life women around them acted, spoke, looked, and dressed. Girls saw that real women came in all different shapes, all different sizes, with lots of flaws and imperfections. Real women were cranky. They got tired, they failed, and they certainly didn't look perfect all the time. They got sweaty, they got angry. But that's not what girls see today. Today, we are all surrounded by carefully crafted pictures of women. These pictures have been edited to make those women look thin and young and perfect. And so as young girls, we learn that for us to be okay as women, we have to look like that and act like that. We must be thin and young and flawless. And if we don't look like that, if we don't measure up physically, we are not okay. Not surprisingly, we grow up to be women who spend hours worrying about our weight, our clothes, our age, comparing ourselves not to real women, but to images and fantasies. We put enormous pressure on ourselves and our sisters and our daughters and our friends and each other to look and be perfect, or else. We set impossibly high standards for ourselves, and then we struggle in vain to meet them. It is no wonder we worry constantly about our appearance, about looking perfect, about being enough, being young enough, thin enough. No wonder we are anxious. Which brings me to the other part the media plays in this, and that is the 24-hour-a-day news cycle. News that is always on, always negative, bad news, bad news, bad news, bad news. If it bleeds, it leads. Today's media not only impacts who we think we should be as women, it also, and maybe more importantly, informs our beliefs about what the world around us is like. Is this world a safe place or not? Is it a good place to be or a bad place to be? Are you safe or are you not safe? And boy, if you watch the news in the morning, in the evening, at noon, whenever, you will hear endless stories of disasters and catastrophes and terrible, terrible things that have gone wrong overnight. What a terrible way to get your day off to a positive start or to end your day. And I want to be clear, that news does not report reality. That is not the truth about the world. It is reporting just a tiny edited part of what real life is really like. You'll hear that story about the airplane that crashed over and over and over. They'll show you pictures of the crash for days and days as if it just happened, as if riding in an airplane is the most dangerous thing you can do. But what they don't show you is that thousands of airplanes take off and land safely every day. The reality is it's safe to fly. You'll hear about fights and fires and all the reasons the world around you is a dangerous place. Don't you go out there. But you hear nothing about how most of us travel safely through our world every day. For the most part, we live our lives in safety, but that's not what we hear about. And that focus, that relentless focus, can make us feel incredibly unsafe in this world. If you watch TV, if you go to the movies, if you play video games, you are likely to see violence, brutality, and conflict, all of which reinforce the idea that life outside, you go out that door, that life is dangerous and unwelcoming, and it can make you afraid to leave your home, to travel outside, and in fact, it can make you afraid to live your life. No wonder we are so anxious. So let's wrap up for today. In this module, we discuss the external things that make us anxious. In the next module, we're going to explore the internal causes of our anxiety. We're going to talk about how our thoughts and beliefs about who we are can actually make us anxious. Because bottom line, knowing what is causing your anxiety is the key to finding the best way to heal that anxiety.